Welcome back to Water Underground Talks. I'm happy to welcome Crystal Tulley-Cordova, a Dene scientist and practitioner from the Navajo Nation of Water Resources. Welcome, Crystal, to Water Underground Talks.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you. Yeah. I want to start with just your passion for water. It involves many things that you do. So how did you first develop a passion for water? Were there any particular incidents along the way that were like, whoa, this is really how it started for me? Or was it kind of more of a slow transition?
So I am Dene from the Four Corners region of the Navajo Nation. And in our language, we introduce ourselves by saying, and what I basically said is, I am Crystal Tulley-Cordova. I am of the Bitter Water clan, born for the Take People clan. And my maternal grandfather's clan is the yucca fruit strung on a line. And my paternal grandfather's clan is the water that flows together. And as you can hear in my clans, water is integrated into our identity. But where I became really interested in studying it was the place that I grew up. And I grew up in a multi-generational household with both my maternal and paternal grandparents, as well as my parents and siblings. And in Arizona, I herding sheep, seen some seashells, fossilized seashells. And it really surprised me, being hundreds of miles from the nearest coast in California, and being able to think, like, these look like seashells you would find. Look a little different because they're thicker and they're more fossilized. And, you know, just as an elementary school student would ask, like, how did this get here? We're so far from the ocean. And it would just really sparked an interest in me to be able to find things like that, as well as imprints of, you know, plant life that were there previously, and just to, you know, think about, wow, this is interesting. This is related to water. But then also, you know, the area that I grew up in, our family hauled water for our water needs. And when you haul water, you have a greater understanding of, like, okay, you just don't turn on the faucet and water comes out, but you really have an understanding of where that water comes from. And in the Navajo Nation, it's predominantly groundwater. So then you begin to think about the water cycle as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That yeah, it's so multifaceted, identity and little curiosities as a child, and also just the value of water in day-to-day life. So thank you, Crystal, for sharing all of those. You mentioned groundwater, and that's kind of one of the overriding themes and motivations for this whole series. And in this season, we're trying to focus on how groundwater is connected to anti-racism, decolonization, and development, sustainable development. So I'm just wondering how these connections with groundwater play out in your region or in your work.
But the region that I'm from, there are definitely things to think about as far as the history. So the history of Navajo people, Indigenous people in this region have been here since time immemorial, but some of the policy and documents for managing the water were signed before Native Americans were recognized as citizens, and that provided challenges from a social justice as well as an environmental justice standpoint. In addition to that, there have been uranium mining in our region, and for the defense of the United States, the purpose of that mining of uranium. And there are a lot of things now to be able to try and address. One, abandoned uranium mine issues as it may relate to water, groundwater specifically, and being able to provide safe drinking water to Navajo communities throughout the Navajo Nation. And also at the same time, concurrently, being able to secure water rights that we've not been able to secure since the signing 100 years ago for the first foundational document, which was the 1922 Compact. Definitely, there have been challenges associated with the Navajo Nation, and when treaties started for our tribe, but also being recognized as citizens of the United States. As an example, the Colorado River, the law of the Colorado River started with a foundational document called the Compact of 1922 for the Colorado River Basin. And at that time period, Native Americans weren't recognized citizens, although we've been here since time immemorial. So there are justice issues related to that challenge, as well as environmental justice issues related to extraction of natural resources like coal and uranium. Specifically with regards to uranium, there are legacy issues for the over 521 abandoned uranium mines that are in the Navajo Nation. And so there are associated groundwater issues with that as well. And the challenge when thinking about, legacy issues and also water rights that we are still trying to secure provides a challenge for providing access to clean water for our Navajo communities. People may have heard when, the Navajo Nation was hit hard during the height of the pandemic, when before the vaccines had come out, in which the Navajo Nation was at one point the highest per capita region in the United States, and how that is, associated with the lack of clean drinking water is important to acknowledge. 30 to 40% of our Navajo residents do not have access to clean drinking water.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for bringing that connection with kind of very current situations as well. Thank you, Crystal. I'm wondering if you can describe a little bit about how your personality or your personal interests strengthen you as a scientist or practitioner in what you do day to day.
Yeah, I'm a principal hydrologist, and it's important to be a representative for the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources and bring my whole self, meaning Indigenous knowledge that I have and have grown up with when raised by family members, both, my mother and father, but also extended family members and extended to that, Navajo community at large. And with that being said, having the opportunity to gain further knowledge by attending academic institutions to obtain a bachelor's, a master's, a doctoral degree, to be able to learn more about water. And both of those knowledges are interrelated, just as a simple example, the water cycle, like we as Native Americans know that, everything in the natural world is connected and dependent upon water. And in my PhD research, what I evaluated were stable isotopes, essentially say H2O for water. And what I evaluated was deuterium, the hydrogen component, and oxygen 18 of water, being able to see how precipitation may be connected to groundwater, springs, streams, both ephemeral and perennial, and be able to, as well as lakes, be able to determine what, I already had known. And so they can be very complementary, the different types of knowledges that we have.
Yeah, thank you. Would you like to describe a little bit more about one form of knowledge and that has impacted you the most, and why?
Yeah, definitely. The knowledge that I have, the Indigenous knowledge that I grew up with, there's no textbooks for it. It's really an oral tradition of passing down information. And, just thinking about medicinal plants in general, I know, people study this plants for their dissertations. And what's been interesting is just to have this knowledge, thinking about generations and how people knew before there was, pharmacies, like these medicinal plants help with this aspect, or thinking about our diet in this region. Things have changed to where we now have milk in our diet to have, calcium and vitamin D, but in fact, there are things within our traditional diet, like having blue corn mush that is mixed with ash to be able to provide some of those same nutritional values, and having a understanding of that is really, fascinating to me, because there are now scholars who evaluate that, on the Western side of science, but also on the Indigenous side of science, and being able to do a comparison between the two.
Yeah, thank you. And it's always useful to kind of help students see these things with examples as well. So thank you for sharing a few examples of Indigenous knowledge and how it shows up in your life and work. My last question is, if there's one thing, this series is for early career hydrogeologists and groundwater hydrologists mainly. So I'm wondering if there's one thing you would like to share with this next generation of groundwater scientists and practitioners.
I definitely think it's important to remember who you are and where you come from, because oftentimes that has guided our pathways for having a desire to learn more, and being able to, really think about like why you have different questions that you have regarding like water or geology, and just thinking about things in general. And I guess one of the things that I'd like to add additionally is that to think about things holistically. I know sometimes we break up different parts of the water cycle, and specifically today we're talking about the groundwater component of the water budget, but it's also important to think about the other impacts that may be related. So, groundwater is recharged by precipitation. And even when you break precipitation beyond that, having an understanding, at least for Navajo Nation, it's looking at winter precipitation and summer precipitation, and having an understanding atmospherically, where does that precipitation come from? Because in the end, what that also shows is, what your isotopic signature might be. And across the world, there are unique isotopic signatures for different regions that exist throughout the world.
Yeah, thank you. I always using the word holistic as well. And some people make fun of me because it can mean so many different things, but I think that's actually one of the values of it. You were describing it holistic of the water cycle. It's also holistic of different knowledge forms and of different groups, of different disciplines. So I think, thank you for that reminder for the next generation. I hope they hear that suggestion from you, Crystal. So with that, I'd like to move to your talk, and I look forward to hearing about it.
Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share more about Navajo Nation underground water. This picture, I feel like, shows a good depiction. This is on the Chuska Mountains looking northward to Shiprock. Not only do you see the various geology, but it's important to also pay attention to components that are represented here as well. The precipitation, the evapotranspiration, and beneath the surface as well, groundwater, and above the surface, ephemeral and perennial streams are farther in the distance, where the San Juan River is. So the Navajo Reservation was established in 1868 after the forced removal of Navajo people from the Four Corners region to Fort Sumner. And through the advocacy of the Diné leaders, the land base has grown. It was initially started in 1868 with that smaller piece of land there, and through different executive orders and through the advocacy of leaders grew to what it is today. And one of the important things to have an understanding about is how large it really is. And it's the largest land-based tribe in the United States, and more recently, the most populated tribe. We have over 403,000 enrolled members. We span across the Four Corners region, the Four Corners states in the southwestern United States, and the Colorado River. We straddle both the upper and the lower Colorado River basin. The water resources that we primarily rely upon are groundwater. However, that is diversifying with settled water rights, in which we have the opportunity to also have access to surface water, such as the San Juan River. There are different challenges associated with the groundwater that we have. On the upper left corner, what you can see is a map of Arizona. The Navajo Nation is shaded in gray on the corner side near the other states of Utah and Arizona here in this region. This map is showing the different total dissolved solid levels. And so brackish water is a challenge for us. And you can see throughout the state of Arizona, we have one of the most concentrated regions of high levels of total dissolved solids. We are working through partnerships. One of the challenges that our tribe has is having enough technical capacity as well as resources to address this issue. But through partnerships with academic institutions, we have the opportunity to use off-grid production technologies to provide safe drinking water for Navajo communities. We are also participating in other partnerships with federal partners. The unique thing about the federal partners is they have a trust responsibility to tribes in the United States. And so we do have a lot of federal programs that we participate in. And here's another map of Arizona showing another study that we're doing to be able to evaluate groundwater and surface water. And it's important to note to be able to look at both because there's interaction between the two. And so having an evaluation of that is really crucial. And within our mountain region, we have a mountain region that it goes into Arizona as well as into New Mexico and goes north to south or south to north, depending on which way you're looking at the mountain. And it's important for us to have an understanding of how, precipitation contributes to streams, either ephemeral, perennial, and being able to have an understanding of how that groundwater recharge occurs. And with other Diné scholars, we are partnering with them to be able to have a better understanding about mountain block recharge. I mentioned previously about the challenges that we have associated with legacy issues from mining. From 1944 to 1986, nearly 30 million tons of uranium ore were extracted from Navajo lands, and there were over 521 abandoned uranium mines. The Navajo Nation banned uranium mining in 2005, but although that ban had occurred, there were already also some challenges. In the map on the left, the X's represent abandoned uranium mines, and then the circles represent the unregulated water sources. And the graph on top denotes the uranium and arsenic samples that were taken on the western side of the Navajo Nation. And the orange represents arsenic, the blue represents uranium, the dotted lines represent the limit for regulated water sources. And what we see in the Navajo Nation is that the unregulated water sources do exceed the domestic water supply water quality standard for both uranium and arsenic in different regions through this chart that is showing different periods of time. And why is this important to note? I mentioned that there's 30 to 40% of Navajo residents that don't have clean drinking water. And if they don't have running water within their homes, some people do rely upon unregulated water sources. And so one of the things that I'd like to ask you, do you know about present environmental justice issues in your communities? For Navajo Nation, this is an example, but I think it's also an important reminder to think about environmental justice issues that we may have in other parts of the world. And it's important to have an understanding of water supply, because when you rely upon the water supply, that gives us a better understanding of what your sustainability level is at, or water security level. And this is a picture of the Navajo Nation and the homes without pipe water the red being more than 200 homes that don't have pipe water, and the gray and green indicating, 0 to 100 homes that may not have pipe water. And when you think about this, one of the things to understand is, this is a groundwater issue because still a lot of our communities rely upon groundwater for their drinking water needs. And the pandemic, occurred in March, well, as far as seeing it here in the Navajo Nation, March 2020. And there was a need, when the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States, recommends washing your hand for 20 seconds, and you're a water hauler. And, something to understand is, how can you wash for that length of time when you may have limited supply? And then also thinking about how can you do that when you also haul your water, like these two individuals are hauling water in the community that I live in. And so there was funding appropriated at the federal level, something called CARES Act funding. It was coronavirus aid funding within the United States. It helped construct transitional water points in communities that didn't previously have an existing water point. So the blue dots on the map on the right are areas that these new water points were constructed. There are 110 communities in the Navajo Nation, so more than 50% of the communities didn't have a public watering point. Also a part of this program was distributing 37,000 water storage containers. Something to also think about is, the water quality. And so how was this addressed, for people who haul water and they have to store it? There was the distribution of 3.5 million doses of water disinfection tablets. And now I return to the water rights issue. So the Navajo Nation does have settled water rights, but we do have unresolved water rights. The first of our water rights was really, a big project called the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project that is shaded in the green, and was able to build a couple of laterals from the San Juan River. The San Juan River spans across the region, going between Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona and Utah, and then draining into Lake Powell, this northwestern region of the Navajo Nation. And in addition to that, something that did occur at the end of 2020 with the omnibus bill as well was as being able to settle the Navajo-Utah water rights settlement. And we were able to settle water for this region, this upper basin of the Navajo Nation, the Utah region, for our water rights. And it's important for those water rights settlement to occur. But one of the questions, to think about as well is, the time period that we're in, the Colorado River is celebrating 100-year anniversary since the initial signing of one of the foundational components of the law of the river, but having an understanding, is it a celebration for all stakeholders? Then Native Americans were not included in the initial signing and has had repercussions for participation where the law of the river is predominantly inclusive of federal and state stakeholders, but the tribes continue to advocate to be able to be a part of the process of engagement as well. And thank you for your time today.
So thank you, Crystal, for the wonderful talk. It was wonderful to see and hear from a real expert the conditions and situation and opportunities for the Navajo Nation in relation to long-standing challenges with water quality and quantity. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge from your work, but also, as you said earlier, your whole self and bringing your whole self to share what you bring to your work. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to share our story.